Hello, hello. The next one is a song from Palestine.
Welcome to Radio Against Repression. You're listening to 88.4.
This is a prayer, a plea, and a protest. We promise to shake one another into a new phase, regeneration. The heart that breaks open contains universes. The sound of your breath moves echoes between centuries, ancestors, sisters. A lung full of stones. Give and ask for permission. We rest on fog. In the haze and the heat, slugs give thanks to the mosses. We are their children.
So welcome then to another Radio Against Repression here live in the studio.
We're joined today by two wonderful artists. We have Siegmar Zacharias, performance artist and founding member of the freelance dance ensemble Berlin, who is the artist behind the wonderful clip that we just heard. Hi, Siegmar.
Hello.
And then we also have Merlin Gebhard, a theater director and musician. Merlin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So we are a bit against the clock today with our radio hour with two amazing, irrepressible guests. So Siegmar, if you would want to start us off and introduce us to the Freelance Dance Ensemble Berlin.
Yeah, thank you. So it's really great being here this morning. And I just thought two things. One is that this piece that you just heard was made entirely by sounds from my body, and it is a thing that works with the nervous system, and so it was always offered as a kind of container for collective grieving in different situations. And maybe we come talking about that later. But the Freelance Dance Ensemble, on the other hand, is something that we founded last December, I think, or November, in reaction to the cuts that were threatening to come and now have materialized in full blow. And it's basically an attempt to give face and story to all the freelancers, mainly from the dance scene, I have to say, in Berlin. That's why it's called Freelance Dance Ensemble Berlin. And it really only had 5 questions. why did you come to Berlin? Why did you stay? 3 questions concerning networks in which you are connected. So no pitching of your work, but more like, who have you worked with? Who has funded you? And this is all catering to the question of excellency. And the 5th question was, what would happen if the cuts, and this was after the first list was circulating, so what would happen if these cuts came into full place? And of course they have come and new ones are looming. So we need to update, and we need to also find ways to talk and let people tell their stories without actually compromising people's existences here in Berlin, because by now it's become an existential question.
Yeah, for those who don't know, the arts and culture scene last year in December was just completely bulldozed by sudden massive budget cuts. It was over 130 million euros that was threatened to be cut. Some of it was taken back, so some of the cuts were worked back, but the arts and culture scene has been massively defunded here in Berlin, together with the social sector and education, whereas the police has gotten a lot more money. Yes. They got over 70 million euros more.
Yes.
But yeah, that was a really existential threat or is.
And I think it's important to really point out that it's not just the arts, but arts, culture, education, diversity programs, anything that has to do with migration laws, all of that basically got defunded.
I think it's interesting as well to see the way in which different sectors of the cultural scene broadly respond to that. Because, I mean, for the visual arts, there was this very embarrassing reflex of doing a funeral march for the arts scene in the context of the genocide in Gaza. And I found it kind of inspiring going through the freelance dance ensemble website of just this kind of very human thing of having faces, of having portraits, of having this sense of, it felt more collective than about individuals personally sort of publicly grieving in a way, this thing that they've become entitled to.
Well, and also, I mean, public mourning marches are exactly how the state actually appropriates the potential of that grief has to actually attack and refuse participating in systems of oppression. So the representative motive of like just showing up, which, you know, it's always good and fun, but to show up in all in black when it's really dark outside and there's nobody to see you is also really... I was in that march, I saw it, and it was really difficult to say, what the hell are we doing here, actually?
Yeah, I was also on the march. But
That's really interesting, because back in December 23, with my drag show, I did a funeral for Western humanity with a friend of mine who's also a playwright, Rafaela Manjori. We wrote a eulogy to Western humanity. You know, we were just over 2 months into the genocide, but it wasn't state funded. We did it in Oyun, which at that point had all of its funding cut. And it was this last weekend, this last big bash that Oyun did. They were still completely unsure about their future. And we read this eulogy to Western humanity, this idea, this lie that was sold to, you know, the West and many of us for all our lives, that, they care about humanity and Western values of democracy and freedom, But
it's progressive. Right.
Yeah, of course. We did it from an anti-genocide stance, and we actually had, we went upstairs and we went to the garden and we buried Western humanity, quote unquote, and I'd put, I had these little white cloth bags, and I'd put flower seeds in them. And I never managed to return to see whether they had flowered, but the idea was okay, hopefully, you know, we'll bury them and then they'll be there over the winter, but then in spring the flowers will grow from this funeral site. So it's interesting that this idea of grief, obviously it's so important and it's such a embodied practice, but it can also really be appropriated by the state.
I mean, memory culture is one way of appropriation of very important embodied memory cultivating. But if it just gets into this little vignette and everything is clear what it's supposed to do and how it works, then that's when appropriation, and that has a lot to do with a lot of states actually trying to metabolize their histories. It always shows up as some kind of memorial. And I'm personally very interested in what is the difference between collective grieving and memorials that are there to atone something.
So, Merlin, you work in theater. You're a theater director and also a musician. Very happy to have another theater person on the show. Hi.
Hello.
What's your experience been with defunding, censorship, and this idea of the state monopolizing on grief and on memory?
Yeah, it's been a strange experience, to say the least. We have a small theatre group. We call it Theater Fanal. So Fanal is a signifier of great change, as a German word. And we want to do political theatre, right? That's been our program, I think, to do. And we did a production this year. It's called They Thought They Were Free. It's quite a remarkable play, a book at least originally, where a Jewish journalist from Chicago went to Germany in the 1950s and interviewed ex-Nazis, and he sort of wanted to understand how this could happen, and he interviewed like normal people, everyday people. And we made a play from that and wanted to get it funded. And we called it anti-fascist art, and we still stand by that. I'm very happy with that, of anti-fascist theatre, and I still like that a lot as a term. People immediately understand it, but it became clear to us very quickly that as far as funding goes, and state funds or even private programs, that's not the sort of language and term that people like to hear, that decide on that funding, which meant it was very tough. And we also explicitly wanted to have a anti-genocidal position in this, where we wanted to do the play, say, okay, we have to understand Nazism as it happened, to understand the genocide that we're complicit right now, because that's what the people in the play do, right? They sort of know on some level that what's happening in the 30s and 40s is wrong in some way, but they still participate, or they don't do anything, which is happening right now, and that has meant that sort of venues closed down to us, that sometimes people found out that we have a statement for Palestine against the genocide, and then like whole productions or whole events that we had planned didn't take place. People pulled out at some points. In my experience, there's the official side also, where people won't fund you, venues closed, but I also experienced a quite remarkable self-censorship from many artists as well, where sometimes it wasn't even clear that this would have a consequence, but many people in our production, without ever being told that way, felt very anxious about coming out against the genocide, and they didn't have a lot of experience with activism in that way also, and it's been a struggle to keep it in the public space and to keep it also part of the fight against the genocide.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned public space, and I think that's maybe a good way to think about how the body is kind of affected by this police brutality and by, of course, like exposure to precarious public situations, and the sense that the public space is no longer at all safe. I mean, it's a given that if you go to a demo and you're standing at the front, there will be violence, right? That's a pretty big shift.
Yeah.
Or that the space is even public. We've had all these bans. We have all these new ideas of what you're allowed to express and what you're allowed to show in the public space, like police telling people that they have to take off their keffiyehs.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But then, Siegmar, I wanted to ask you about kind of specifically about your practice and the body and sort of working through. It's a dance practice, but it also has this other, how can I put it, like more visceral quality.
I work in the dance field, but I work with a lot of, what you heard now is a listening session that was basically actually made during the pandemic in order to create containers where we can engage with each other, even if it's only through our nervous systems. And the sounds always work. I mean, there's a whole research in there about how sounds work with our nervous systems. But because of the nervous systems, I want to go even like 2 steps back or in the front or to the side. I'm born and raised in Romania in a totalitarian regime under Ceausescu. And everybody who has that kind of experience, whether it's in the global south, whether it's in East Germany, whether it's anywhere, where your people, doesn't matter if you yourself or it's an intergenerational trauma that is passed down into the body, have experience to detect and sense totalitarianism. With me, it happened like on the 10th of October 2023. Like 3 days after the 7th of October, I had panic attacks because what I was experiencing was exactly what you were mentioning, which is mostly, censorship, propaganda, I would call the Staatsräson propaganda, and self-censorship. And I think what happens when you and your people are grow up and live in suppressed situations for so long, this enters your it enters on the cellular level, it enters your bone, it sediments in the kind of structures of your babies and your, and so I think what people don't realize who thought or still think possibly that they live in the free democracy here is that they don't realize how strongly these things actually seep and creep in under your skin and into your bones and into your cells. And so this is why, and this is, I think, what's so dangerous about it, because just going along, you start complying and enabling totalitarianism more and more and more. Totalitarianism is not something that is studied or learned and trained. Totalitarianism is something that is practiced and kind of numbed with, and let yourself kind of being carried by the waves of it. And as much as like I'm using these rhetorics because being carried by the wave and being like being held by water and all of that is all really nice metaphors. But the problem is that if you're so much bathing in this politics, you don't even realize how much it actually changes your structure, both physically and relationally.
Yeah, I mean, as a concrete way that I try to describe what's going on in the body in that way, which I think you've also articulated very, very clearly, is like you have these 2 different forms of information and sensory processing in your body, right? You have your vagus nerve system that's going through all your organs and your touch and your smell and your hear and your listening and everything. And then you have this kind of cerebral brain cortex, and all of that information has to be fed through this kind of channel at the top of your neck and the bottom of your brain stem. And so it gets very, very confusing. And there's all these different forms of information that are operating at the same time. It's a relay almost.
Yeah, so a lot of the work that I do is basically create containers to both unnumb, also detach from the disconnect, and exchange, because I think one of the best medicines. So I work with sound, I work with plant medicine, I work with all of that coming from performance and dance, and I do this both in so-called artistic fields and in kind of social fields, working with death workers, but also grief circles, public grief circles that kind of allow. I have like this slogan of all bodies are welcome, all grieves are welcome, because there's not just one grief, there's multiple grieves that show up in different ways and do and undo us in different ways. So I think it's important to find ways to exchange, and somehow, because it is so embodied, I remember having one of these circles where anti-Zionist Jews and Palestinian Arab people were actually sharing space and feeling that they can speak to and with each other because they speak through the body. And I'm really not trying to romanticize this at all, but I do think that grief is something that we need to kind of go back to the breath and I mean, our nervous system and our brain system are very highly interconnected, of course. So we do have to reflect. So that the intellectual disconnect and the physical unnumbing and emotional, spiritual unnumbing have to go hand in hand.
So this is the bit where we shamelessly ask you for your support. If you think this content is important and you'd like the podcast to get its wings, consider supporting us on patreon.com/Radio Against Repression.
I'm curious, Merlin, you speak about how there's all this self-censorship and there's this incredible difficulty to talk about the genocide and things in the German cultural scene. And personally, I feel that is also, it's gotten worse with the cuts because people are even more afraid because they feel like there's more to lose. And I wonder, like, how do we navigate that? How do we end this intense and also, but like, you can, personally, I sometimes I feel it as like a tightening in the chest when there's this self-censorship going on. I remember a piece of mine that was read in a course of like a longer reading that I hadn't chosen. It was within the context of the university. And I just wanted to run out of the room because there was all these Germans that I didn't know how they would react. And I wasn't afraid of any one concrete thing. I just felt so like I wanted to run away.
Right, yeah.
How do you break out of this?
Good question. No, I mean, I think it can't solely be through a great idea that we have. I think like processing this and going through it through your, like having your whole body process that is very important. And I think especially in the German like culture scene or German culture in general, we're very cerebral people often, or even our artists are. And I think having a space where we can sort of feel that before we discuss it is probably very important. But I mean, I wish I knew. I wish I could tell you that easily. But I empathize with that a lot. I remember when we finally got it to a point where we had the play and then had the applause, and then we would come out and have this statement for Palestine, right, against the genocide. And you could feel the tension in everyone. But the amazing thing also was that the audience reaction, I don't know how it was in your case, you can tell me, but the audience reaction was very positive. Like it was like, it had a feeling of like, God, finally someone stands on the stage and speaks up about this. And it made me feel a bit silly in hindsight, because I also thought like, are they going to shout something? Are they going to be angry? And that was not at all what happened. Obviously, that's the sort of people that go to that kind of play also, sure. But I think sometimes actually being confronted with the reality of the feedback is not as bad as the image you have in your head before you do that.
Yeah, I've definitely made both experiences. Like I've been in situations where I was the first and only person to speak up about Palestine, and then another woman, like someone tried to shut me down, and then another woman stood up, interrupted him, and almost started crying, being like, finally someone has said something, can we please? And this was a theater maker who had worked a lot on the racist attacks, the arson attacks in Solingen and Mölln in the 90s against mostly Turkish people in Germany.
The person that defended you.
The person that defended me. And then but there's also been people who, like, suddenly you get all this host of emotion welling up.
Yeah. I mean, something that we did after our performance, and we'll continue to do that, and I'd be curious to hear how it is in your cases, is we didn't just like have the performance, have the statement, and then send people home. We had a discussion afterwards, is what we called it, where everyone sat in a big circle, and we invited people to speak from the heart and listen with the heart, and not discuss it as much. Discussion was probably the wrong term for it, more a dialogue, and that unleashed a lot of those things, and it allowed people to also grieve and share those emotions and that feeling in a much more direct way than I think any panel discussion or something that you'd usually be inclined to do after that sort of theatre performance would have been able to accomplish. Yeah.
But I think these panel discussions are an exchange of information, whereas something like, to the listening session, the sound piece that we heard belongs as a third part, always an exchange, verbal or non-verbal, pre-verbal exchange somehow. And I think those are the spaces where we actually need to both let ourselves say what we think and feel especially, but also license, hold space for people who sometimes also are not allowed to speak up. And I do think we are not in comparison to Ceausescu regime, this is not where we're at yet. There is still a window of opportunity here in which we can use all the skills of critical thinking and democratic education and re-education after the Second World War, all of that shit that Germany grew up with, and the entitlement also to question the state and to question the executive. This whole kind of falling apart of the executive, judicative, and legislative, that's the problem. It's like the whole base is falling apart. And Germany has been educated, and Germans, people who have been educating here, to stand up for these values. So if they don't do it now, if we don't do it now, then we can slide into full totalitarianism. And then I just wanted to say one more thing, that maybe, and I'm not the only one who says this, it's time to actually learn from the migrant communities who have much, much, much more experience with both to navigate totalitarian systems and to organize resistance.
Yeah. It's a huge resource that resource makes it objectifies it so much perhaps, but it's a huge opportunity to learn from that. I agree, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's acknowledging the knowledges, and both like embodied and intellectual knowledges that have been cultivated for so many years.
Yes, I think we have the concept of repression is useful for us in the sense that we repress our guilt and our shame, and then this is sort of, if you like, echoed and sort of eternal return of the state then repressing just emotions. Often, at the very beginning, you saw people really just very emotional about what was going on in public. And of course, that can't be allowed to happen because who knows where that will lead. And so the thing does kind of come apart. And
it's an argument that's used against Palestine protests. It's just like, oh, the people are very emotionalized. And it's like, yeah, that's why it's a protest.
Yeah.
Like, that's the point of a protest. Like, people have opinions and they have emotions. And that's the whole point. And you're suddenly making that into a problem when it is people mad about a genocide that the state is supporting.
Yeah. Yes, and I've read that the police used the excuse that things were getting emotional to justify violence itself, right? Which is their emotion, actually. But to pick up on the point you were saying, Siegmar, about things falling apart, because I think there's a couple of points there which relate to the clip that we're going to hear from the press conference at Spora after the Global Flotilla captives were released. And that is that they began the press conference. So it was a closed event, and we have the recording, and it's in German, but we're going to listen to the English-speaking part at the very end. But I did go back through and listen to the whole thing in German, and I thought it was very encouraging that they began the event with breathing exercises, actually. And I thought that was a good sort of step. Of course, I think in a way what you're saying, Siegmar, is that rather than just tack it on, we should be just doing that, actually. We should, like, Spora should be setting out an event for the people, and then we come and we do that as a practice in its own right. I think that's where we could be going with that.
We've done that at Spora.
Yeah, there you go. So, and then I think the other thing is this idea of democracy sort of unraveling and how so to go back into this intellectual process, which I'm very keen to hear all of your opinions and takes on that at this particular moment. Shall I play the clip? and then okay.
While I was listening to you the best I could with my C1 German, there was always this question of, I actually don't know, there's a lot of language that I don't have for all the things that you're saying here. And also as a writer, artist, journalist, I also really struggle with what do we call this place we live in, because it's not a democracy. You made that very clear. At the same time, we cannot apparently say that it's a dictatorship, even though we have all of the proof that it is. Whatever, we can't say that. Maybe we need another word. I don't know what that word is, but yeah, this is not a democracy. And so for me, the question is, okay, so if I don't live in a democracy, if I'm trying to fight for justice, if I am a marginalized person in this country, then my question is always then, what can I do as someone who does not live in a democracy and is trying to fight against this dictatorship? And, like, part of that is being here, but it's still, I'm personally very limited. And so my question is, what do you think that we can do more in a safe way, knowing that we don't live in a democracy, and knowing that when I go to the march, if I'm right at the front and the police is there, it's very likely that they will hit me. And so, I can stay at the back of the march, I can come here. Like, what else do you think, from your knowledge and intelligence and experience, that someone like us, I guess, what else can we do to support you?
I mean, that is a big question. What do we do in a safe way to survive in a society like this one? I don't think there's a right answer to it, but I've just noticed that it has been helping me a lot to go to the gym and pump, to work out. Also, like, I think like we are underestimating the possibilities of the day-to-day violence, physical violence that we have been enduring, and I think it's been skyrocketing in Germany, specifically in Berlin. Like, if you wear keffiyeh, if you're black and brown, if you're queer, trans, visibly Muslim, that will increase. Like, I've never heard and experienced and seen and witnessed so much violence from day-to-day regular Germans on our bodies in the last few, like in the past 2 years. It just feels like it's been intensified drastically. And we do have, I feel like we only have one another. So like when you say we're not outnumbered, we're out-organized, we need to learn from places like London, for example, where intersectionality is actually lived across communities, even though we might not have to agree on everything, but we can still work together. And I feel we need to relearn how to be with one another despite differences. So, which translates to one way for us to cope in that society is to empower one another and to see each other and to be present, to check in, and to be okay to be in shared spaces with people you just have disagreements with. And I've learned that on the flotilla too, because it was, what was it, like 30,000 applications, hundreds of people on different ports, people I've never met before, and people that might not be friends ever, in that life, but it's okay to still walk side by side. I think being fit, being healthy, being aware of your surrounding, being there for one another, to work out, to be able to physically respond to violence, which would also give you more self-confidence on how we walk in the streets. I don't know if someone saw the video yesterday. People need to be able to defend themselves, whether it's violence or police violence. And I don't know about the legalities, but I think it doesn't matter whether they have a uniform or not. When someone punches me in the face, then I have, my body responds to it. And we just need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, so that's Luna Sabu speaking at the press conference held at Spur on the 8th of October, which was titled Human Rights versus Stadträson in the Context of the Global Flotilla to Gaza. Mm-hmm. And that's also with Yasmin Akkar.
This reminds me of last summer when I was, I guess summer before last now, God, it's October. Summer 24. I was in Palestine again in the occupied West Bank working with Ashtar Theatre Ramallah, and they had a summer program with the Palestinian Circus School. And there were young people, they were, I'd say, between like 16 and 25, from all over the occupied West Bank, coming together for 4 weeks for a theater and circus seminar. So it'd be circus in the morning and then theater in the afternoon, and then it would switch. And I was there for 2 weeks, and it was incredible how you could see how their bodies shifted. So these are children who their entire lives, children and young adults, you should say, who their entire lives have been living under occupation, under a violent, brutal military occupation, who know people who are in prison, who might have experienced settler violence and violence by the IOF themselves, who have experienced the checkpoints and the apartheid wall. Some of them had never left their city because of that. Just like, well, you just stay. Your horizon becomes very small, your body becomes very small. And it was crazy to see over those 2 weeks how they expanded. Where in the beginning you felt that they didn't even know sort of where their limbs were. And circus, very doing these physical things that you usually wouldn't, you're hanging upside down from a trapeze. And it wasn't just sort of the physical element of it, but you could see that their minds and their bodies simultaneously were expanding and expanding of what they thought they could do and what they permitted themselves to even try.
Yeah, fascinating. And I mean, that's amazing. I bet that the community of it must have helped with that, right? I think that's such an important aspect also to what the clip was just now talking about. If the way you go rigid in your body and your mind, if you're isolated and if you're alone, it's hard to describe even, right? And it's a very extreme form of that, obviously, in the West Bank, where those barriers are like literal checkpoints where you might not get through at all. But as far as democracy and whether we live in one, I think it's not that easy to say whether we do or don't. I'm not even sure I would agree with the person that answered the question in the clip just now, or that asked the question, where it was sort of assumed that we don't live in a democracy. Because I don't think whether you or politicians do what you want or whether you vote for them, that's certainly one thing that filters into that. But I think democracy is also so much of a culture and so much of a thing that you do and not just a thing that you are in. And if you can find ways to connect with each other and to do something and to support each other in that way, obviously, but also in ways we can do here in Germany or in Europe.
I mean,
that's also democracy, I think.
The position from the conference which they were referring to, which I appreciate is not in the clip, so it's not helpful, but is that basically once the members of the flotilla, the human rights advocates, were effectively kidnapped by the Israeli army, and she used the German. Oh, I think it's actually a lawyer at that point who's speaking in the conference, and he was like, they're like entmenschlicht and entrechtlicht. So they have had their rights taken away and they've had their humanity taken away. Yeah. And that if the German state does not intervene at that point, then are you still living in a democracy at that point? Because are you serving the rights of your citizens, your subjects? Yeah.
I mean, hard agree on that, and that absolutely. Or are you even living in a Rechtsstaat, as the Germans like to call it? Which that certainly. But that's not what I meant, right? It's like the way we respond to it. We have some agency over that. Is what I think. And it's so easy to get isolated, especially if you scroll through social media and whatever, where it feels like, well, it's all out of my hands. But at the moment you realize you are an actor in history, and you can participate with that. It shifts. Like I felt worse in the time where I was just watching social media than I felt when I went to demos and got punched in the face. Not that I like getting punched in the face, but it was like I was in a community of people getting punched in the face at least, instead of sitting alone at home.
I mean, I think this pointing out that democracy is a doing and not a state is super important, but it also means that you have to actually be doing. I mean, either kind of ducking down or freezing or using freeze as a shield, all kind of incapacitates the doing, or is an excuse for not doing something, including doing democracy. So, and I do think there's a lot of that happening at the moment. The other thing that I also still wanted to come towards is we're talking about violence, or a lot of it is around violence and how bodies deal with violence and or produce violence. And I just want to introduce this differentiation between brutality and violence, because brutality is, and thinking now with Morton and Hardy, which who have spoken about this, and the difference between violence and brutality is that, so brutality is the act of individuation, the act of subject becoming subject, the Western white subject, and so on and so forth, which then also produces everything that we know now as slow violence, which is state violence that can go on for like hundreds of years. But then there is the question of violence and non-violence. And I just want to, something that helps me to think about is that violence per se is nothing, is not the antidote to life, let's say. Like there's so many, so for example, the seeds of eucalyptus need to burn before they can germinate. Birthing is one of the most violent processes you can imagine for both the birth giver and the birthed person. Violence per se is maybe a rupture of structures, but not something that has malice or has an ideology of supremacy written inside of it. And that's why I think violent protests are part of like refusing dominant and brutal structures that don't allow certain ways of existence. And so this is all to say that I would wish that we would have a much more differentiated, not just conversation, but also doing of what violence actually is and what brutality is. And what we're witnessing here is a police brutality, state brutality that has been built since kind of in parallel to building a democratic self-understanding. It kind of kept building these brutal structures of supremacist thinking, I'm sorry to say, but that's somehow what gets represented in Western democracies also. And then to come back to the violence, yes, it is a very embodied thing, and we experience it with the breaking open. Like there's a difference between refusing to act and the nervous system shutting down. And there's also a difference between when does this nervous system shut down? Is it because I feel discomforted or, just snapped out of my comfort zone, or because there's like trauma that is becoming active in my body and in my mind, emotion, spirit, everything body. So, I think part of the problem of so-called nonviolent communication is that it assumes a certain way of talking, which is quiet, clear, and transparent, and non-emotional. And everything that is loud, emotional, opaque, and maybe not cohesive is dehumanized and not being taken seriously. And that is a big problem. And we can start with that in our classrooms, in our homes, on our streets, in debates. I wish we would have more public debates where we just witness people losing their shit.
Violence becomes this. We're not so often in the general debate when violence is used. It's just as this buzzword. We're not talking about like what is actually violence and what isn't. And then you have these things like non-violent communication. And I'm not like it's important that the word violence, because violence does exist, it is a thing, and it is important that we just are careful and nuance of like what is violence and what is violence not. And violence isn't something that we like always and forever should have no space in our life, because as you say, like life just contains violence. That's part of it, but it's also something that we can actually win. Like I remember going to protests and doing demo trainings, and the way it changes people when they realize that they can actually defend a block. They can chain up, and then the police will be scared to come in, and maybe they won't. Like you can actually defend against these things, against these structures, and we shouldn't. There's a certain contingency of, and I think that is kind of large also in the arts and culture scene. Also with this conversation always about like nonviolent communication and stuff, we've sort of lost all touch like what violence actually means. Where violence is something that we sometimes have to use to our advantage, because we don't live in a perfect nonviolent world that we would just bring violence into with our own actions. Violence exists. And nonviolence as a political theater, to say with
don't get me wrong, I think nonviolent communication, I've been teaching it for ages without calling that, but I think there are some tools inside of that are incredibly helpful. Where it becomes problematic is when it comes only in one shade, and that is white. So what are to be aware of, like, what are the colonial implications or assumptions when we practice or reproduce certain ways of being with each other? Just to kind of point that out. I think there is some really, really good tools in there, but we have to just be aware of like when it flips into some kind of ideology that promotes only one way of being.
Yeah, I mean, I think of Resmaa Menakem, somatic practitioner in the United States, right, who he's not talking about a world without violence because he's not living in one. And so he's actually talking more about practices of like taking the violence on and then metastasizing it, breaking it down into component parts and finding ways then to sort of flush that through the body. And it's not like it's done and then it's done. This is a cyclical process. This is about frequency. This is about density. And I think what you were saying as well, Merlin, about groups of people, this is about familiarity. It's not just about being in a group of people. It's also about being in a group of people that you begin to recognize and you begin to see as kin in some way. That, for me, is when the work starts to happen. It's not just turning up with a group of random people, because that's part of it, but it's not, what we want is actually to engender some sort of cultural movement, let's say, that brings these types of practices to people outside of the kind of esoteric little bubble that we're like literally in this recording studio right now. I mean, that's why we're broadcasting, I guess.
Right, yeah.
So just to try and sort of put a bow on all of this, because it's been such a fascinating conversation, it's also been very information heavy. We didn't put any music in the show because we knew that there would be a lot of really strong opinions and ideas. So we're at a fork in the road, as we always are. We can, I think, close out with this short play. And it's interesting that we came down to this idea of violence in the end, because this is what the play is kind of like particularly trying to do. But in 1968, which of course, from where we stand now, is a much more violent period, right? I mean, it's set in Italy. So does everyone have, I know that you don't, because I can see
I also don't.
Okay, let me get you on.
I nominate Alex as the narrator.
Okay, that's fine. I don't mind to be the narrator because I wrote the thing. So what about the rest? I mean, the second priest has like 2 lines, so someone can be the second priest and another person.
Merlin, you be Lakota.
Right.
Siegmar, you be the first priest.
And the third priest.
And the third priest.
Okay. So shall I say first priest or not?
No. We'll just. I'll give
pretend
you
they
a.
have the same.
I'll give you a. Yeah. Well, you could slightly change your accent.
Okay.
I'll be the second and the fifth priest. Yes.
Okay.
I'll be the fifth priest as well.
Right.
It's
Okay,
also
they
just
have
like two
back to back.
things.
Yeah, true. Mm-hmm.
So we are going to read this re-dramatization from a very central scene to the film The Shoes of the Fisherman from 1968. The film The Shoes of the Fisherman is set in the year that it was released, 1968, just 5 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, 4 years after the assassination of JFK, at the heart of the Cold War and the mobilization of multiple revolutionary movements around the globe. The film is premised on the idea that the core values of Christianity and Marxism are compatible in so much as each doctrine wants to serve the masses and provide work, dignity, and resources for all. And so the question becomes, by which means? The plot involves, it's a good film, I do recommend watching it. It's a little long and it's very much of its period with the music and everything, which is why we're dramatizing it, because if we just played the clip, everyone would probably fall asleep. The plot involves an unlikely candidate, a bishop, who's freed from 20 years of imprisonment in the labor camps of Siberia. His name is Kirill Pavlovich Lakota. And at this point in the plot, the Catholic Church is in a position where it needs to elect a new pope. The pope has died. At the heart of the film, there is a scene that perhaps speaks to the question of the moral and legal right to defend oneself from oppression. In this scene, the priests are taking a break between the extended voting process to decide who will be pope.
Revolution is in the air, and we are not prepared for it.
Our young priests are prepared for it. They're finding ways to love with change and make changes.
Yes, sometimes they frighten me.
But why? They see injustice and want to correct it.
And they may make more through ignorance and inexperience. Our friend Lakota here should be an expert on revolution.
At this point, Lakota makes a joke about Marxism in Russia being very conservative and now primarily an export product of the Soviet Union. The collection of priests laugh, but they press him for an answer to the question of the relationship between Marxist revolution and the church.
We should manufacture the authentic Christian revolution. Work for all, bread for all, dignity for all.
But without violence.
Well, excuse me, but violence is a reaction against a situation that has become intolerable, isn't it?
Oh.
In the camps in Siberia, we were starved and brutalized. I stole some bread. I fed it crumb by crumb to a man whose jaw had been broken by a guard. I fought the guard to save my friend. I could have killed him. That was a terrifying experience. I, a bishop, could have killed a man.
So as a bishop, you would give your approval to societal disorder?
I might be forced to accept it as a price for societal change, yes?
You are walking a moral tightrope.
We all have to walk it. That is the price that we pay for being human.
But what if you've killed the guard?
I don't know. Eminence, I do know that we are in action. In a brutal world, the children of God are ours to protect, and if we have to fight, we fight.
Beautifully rendered.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, thank
so
you.
much for the conversation.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
Where can people find you? Are there upcoming shows you have? Anything you want to invite our listeners to?
Yes, you can find us. Theater Fanal, Fanal is the name we have on Instagram. That's where we'll post upcoming shows. There is some in Hamburg with They Thought They Were Free, the play that I mentioned, and the conversation that'll be in December. And that's where you can find us.
And if you want to listen to more of the listening sessions, please look at Seigmar Zacharias at SoundCloud. freelance.com. You'll find all 4 of them there. They're binaural sessions that you can listen with headphones. And if you want to be part of the Freelance Dance Ensemble, please look us up and become a member by signing up and giving some of your information, which is Freelance Dance Ensemble Berlin, I think .com or .de. You have to see.
And from my side, you can now actually buy, by the time that this is broadcasting, you can buy the album, Sonne Levant, the first album by Fake Lines Studio that collects over 30 amazing Levantine artists, most of them musicians, and then I'm very honored to be one of the, I think, 4 poets.
Wow.
Nice.
Yes, I feel very fancy. And yeah, you can buy it at fakelines.studio, and you can get it digitally for download. That's where you will find my piece. And then if you are an old-fashioned fancy person, if you are an old-fashioned fancy person, oh my God, what's going on with my pronunciation? You can get it as a vinyl as well. And there you'll only have the music. You will not get the poets. And the music is also amazing.
Well, that's very exciting. I'm not going to do any self-promotion, but I wanted to thank you, Siegmar, Merlin, for joining us both today in the studio. It's been a very, very special episode.
Oh yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shout out.
Thanks for doing this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.